sign in and get started right now. Please continue grabbing your lunch and getting settled. Just a quick introduction of who I am. My name's Talisa Belam. I am the managing broker for Coldwell Banker Roseville office, and for a short period of time, the Auburn office. I have 26 years in the business, plus my father owned a brokerage, so I kind of grew up in the whole thing. So when you add it all together, it's a long time. I consider myself a contract nerd. I absolutely love this document. I feel like it is our sword and our shield, and if you know how to use the contract, then you're going to be an amazing agent, and you'll be able to do great things for your clients. So we're going to dig in, and we're going to go through the full packet and all of the related forms as they come into the contract. And the way I'm going to go about it this morning is, as we go through the grid, right, which is the new awesome thing about our new RPA, I'm going to go into the section that speaks to that piece of the grid. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So when we come out of the grid, we'll be like almost done with the whole thing because we will have covered everything as we went along. And I think it just makes sense to cover them as they are connected to each other. So I'm going to jump right in and get started. The first thing I want to do is have everyone in the room stand up and introduce themselves. Totally kidding. Just kidding. Joking. That's my last stupid joke, I promise. Maybe. All right. There may be more. I'm going to do my best. All right, so let's get into it. So the first, where I like to start is to remind all of you that when you go into zip forms and you pull it, you're pulling a packet. So there's going to be the residential purchase agreement, which is the 16 pages, but because Carr was tired of us making mistakes and leaving things out and doing crazy things like I used to, like throwing pages out, I don't need this, I'm not going to use that, they combined everything together that we must use and have prior to writing the RPA. And so those pieces are connected to the residential purchase agreement as well. So both, there's documents in the front and documents in the back of the actual RPA that we're going to dig into and cover. So where I'm going to start this morning is the first thing that shows up, which is the disclosure for representing more than one, this is the agency disclosure for agency relationship. And you want to make sure that you're using this whenever you have more than a casual relationship with a client. So that's the rule that you should say, when should I be using the agency disclosure? And it's whenever you have more than a casual relationship. So if someone says to you, hey, how's the market? And you give them market information, that's casual. But if you're looking to write an offer for somebody, if you're presenting comparables, if you're going on a listing presentation, if you're doing a buyer consultation, that's not considered a casual relationship. So even though this document is attached to our RPA, that should not be the first time that you're reviewing this document with your client. You should be talking about your agency relationship as soon as you have a real serious conversation with your client. And it's always a great place to start, because when you get into it, it spells out exactly what you as an agent are going to do for your client. And whether they're a seller or a buyer, or if you're going to end up representing them in dual agency, you can start out by explaining to them that you have a duty of diligent exercise and care in the performance of your duties, a duty to disclose all facts that are known to you that affect the value or desirability of the property, and a duty of honest and fair dealings. And I think it's really important that you start out any relationship with the client with those three basic pieces of information, and it sets the tone for who you're going to be as an agent. We are in a fast-paced world, and many of our clients are searching for properties online, and by the time they get to us, they just want us to open the door. They just want us to let them in the house. They just want to move. And oftentimes, we're just sending documents over via DocuSign or some other system, and we're not having that conversation. We're not talking to them about what our relationship is, and we're not talking to them about what needs to happen and setting them up for success. And so that can hurt us in a lot of different ways. One, it erodes our value, and then we start having conversations about why should I pay you what I pay you, what have you done, what do you deserve. But when we start out as professionals and we immediately set the tone of what our professional relationship is going to be with our clients, then it elevates us in their minds and it elevates us across the board with all people about who realtors are and why we deserve the compensation we deserve. Speech number 1 of the day. Okay. But it also lets them know that you guys have the packet in front of you. I'm on page 1. Down at the bottom, when you're representing more than one buyer or seller, you have the same duties, but it's very specific about what it means when you're representing a buyer and a seller. And it's very clear that you cannot share information which is considered their financial position, their motivation, their bargaining position, or any other personal information that may impact the price, including the seller's willingness to accept a price less than the list price, or the buyer's willingness to pay a price greater than the price offered. And a lot of times, especially when you're the listing agent, buyers want to come directly to you because they think that's their fastest way to get into contract. But you have to be very, very careful if you're going to represent both a buyer and a seller. And you have to look at that and make sure that you're being fair. You have to disclose to both sides everything that's happening, but you have to keep that bargaining position or any of that motivational stuff to yourself. So it's important that we're clear on what that duty is. The second page of the second page of the agency disclosure is just a copy of the civil code. And I bring this up because I remember when these weren't all attached to each other, I would throw that page away. So don't throw the page away, and they don't let you throw the page away now. So what they've done is they've made it so it's a copy of the civil code. It's got a sample box on the bottom so you can't insert anything in there. The agents that have been in the business for a long time, you guys know, we used to do all kinds of crazy stuff. Now they got you guys locked down so you can't be crazy. It's because of all this dumb stuff that we did when we were coming up in the business. So it's a 2-page form. Both pages need to be presented to your client, but the second page is just a copy of the civil code. Fair housing and discrimination advisory. This is becoming more and more of an issue. It's really important for us to make sure that our clients, particularly our sellers, have an opportunity to review this before taking offers. One of the things that's highlighted, or I like to highlight in here, is the section that speaks to getting letters from buyers. And sometimes we used to be pretty, it used to be pretty common that a buyer would submit a letter to the seller to say, you know, hey, Mr. Seller, we are an awesome family. Look at us. Look how happy we are. You know, we'll be just like you. We'll be great fit for the neighborhood, whatever it is. That could end up being a fair housing violation for the seller, because if they're making a decision based on any of the protected classes, you could be putting your seller in a very, in a bad situation. So I think, and CAR's advising all of us as agents, just don't take the letter. Don't accept the letters, right? You can be really careful, and you can make sure that when your buyer writes the letter, they're only complimentary of the seller, they're complimentary of the home, they may be complimentary of things that the seller has done to the home, but it's walking a tightrope. It's really walking a tightrope. So I just want to point that out to you all. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the fair housing form, but as agents, it is our duty to make sure that our clients have read it, they understand it, and that we are looking out to protect them in that way. The other thing you want to keep in mind for your practice when it comes to fair housing, make sure that if you have a standard of practice, you're applying that rule across the board to all of your clients. So for instance, if your rule is, I never put anybody in my car, don't then put someone special in your car. Or if you take everyone in your car, but then there's someone that you're like, I'm not comfortable putting that person in my car. You just want to make sure that you're fair across the board. Whatever it is that you do it to all of your clients and everyone that you work with. And that'll keep you out of trouble, okay? All right. moving faster than I think. Okay. Possibility of more than one buyer or seller. This is our other agency form that we have to go with. And what the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller says to our clients is it is possible that our might be representing more than one seller. Let's say, for instance, I take a listing and I price my listing at $1 million, and then here comes another agent from my office, same make and model, same block. They take a listing and they price theirs at 900 and blah, blah, blah. They price theirs lower than mine, all right? And my seller might be furious. How could you do this to me? Why would you do this? They're gonna look at that listing and not my listing. This is unfair. Well, this disclosure lets them know up front that there's a possibility that there could be competing listings, or on the other hand, there could be buyers competing for the same home within the same brokerage. It also gives you, as an agent, the ability to write competing offers. So if you chose, you could have two buyers, and it happens in this crazy competitive market with not enough inventory. You could be working with two buyers who both want you to write an offer on the same house. So this disclosure gives you the ability to do that. And it's not something that you pick and choose and say, well, I might be doing it on this one and I might not be doing it on that one. In every situation, you may not know, especially if you work for a big brokerage. You don't know who else in your office could be writing or could be taking a listing or whatever may come up. So on every transaction, every relationship that you have with your client, you want to make sure to disclose to them that there's a possibility that you could be having a competing relationship with another client that could be competing with that listing or with that buyer. Does that make sense? It also goes into a few other really important things. So it again talks about dual agency, and it talks about how you have to treat dual agency. It talks about confidential information. It talks about that motivation and bargaining position, the same thing we saw in the disclosure regarding agency relationship. But then there's another piece on there that's really important for us to understand, and it says offers are not necessarily confidential. The buyer is advised that the seller or listing agent can disclose the existence or terms or conditions of the buyer's offer unless the agent has a written confidentiality agreement. Whether any such information is actually disclosed depends on many factors, such as market conditions, prevailing practice in the real estate community, and the listing agent's marketing strategy and the seller's instructions. So that's a mouthful, that says a lot. But what we need to understand is that if I believe that I can get the best price for my seller by telling you, oh, I got an offer, I've got 5 offers, and telling you I've got an offer that's $50,000 higher, and then telling you I can do that. I have every right and authority to do that. Some agents may feel like they just don't think that's fair and they don't want to do it. And so it's the agent's marketing strategy. So basically it's what the agent decides that they want to do and how they want to conduct their business. But you can ask, you know, how many offers do you have? What's your highest offer? And if that agent is comfortable giving you that information, then they absolutely can do that. Some people want to avoid their offers being shopped. So what they'll do is they'll submit a confidentiality agreement with their offer. And that's what they're talking about, a written confidentiality agreement. That's great, except for the way that it flows is when you send over the confidentiality agreement with the offer, the agent, the listing agent, can simply say, not signing the confidentiality agreement, still presenting the offer. So it's up to that agent. Some agents will say, well, they sent me the offer, so therefore I feel like I need to keep it confidential. Again, it's up to that agent. The only way to guarantee that your offer is not going to be shopped is to send over the confidentiality agreement, have it signed, and then send over your offer after you have that signed. But in this market, good luck, right? The house is sold 10 times. So as much as we want to make sure that we're protecting our buyers and giving them the best opportunity, unfortunately, in my mind, the only way to give our buyers the best opportunity is to make sure that every time they're writing the highest and best offer. There's no magic bullet to protect them. There's no real game to play. this is one of the craziest markets I've seen in a really long time in terms of how high people are willing to go and how far people are willing to drop. Anyway, another stupid joke. So, does that all make sense? All right. I'm going to go slower when we get into the actual RPA, don't worry. I'm just moving fast with these first. The next form is the wire fraud. And I saw Janine out there. I saw Laura out there. I know that you guys could go on and on about how important it is to protect the client's information. And what I think as agents we need to do is conversation before any money is being wired. And we're talking to our agents and making sure that they have a real contact, making sure to give them the escrow officer's business card and telling them to be so careful because they're really good. Like scam art are like amazing, right? They can get in there and they can send an email that looks exactly like the title company, and once that money is pulled out of your client's account, it's really hard to get it back. So Janine, did you want to say anything more? I know I'm just skimming the surface. Yeah. We have to have that conversation with our clients. If something happens to them and their money and you didn't have the conversation, like hold your head down in shame, like you're in trouble, right? Seriously. All right, let's do the real deal document. We're into it. That was it. We're into the real RPA now. This is exciting. This is the good stuff. All right, so this is a section right before we get into the grid. And we're going to get through this first section, and then we'll jump into the grid and talk about all the new exciting changes in the new RPA. First section, first thing you see when you pop up on the residential purchase agreement is the date prepared. And I think that it only lets you put today's date in there now. When you use the form in zip forms, like you can only put today's date in there. So the day you're writing the offer, the day you're preparing the offer, no, that happened to me when I was using it. The day you're preparing the offer is the date prepared. It doesn't mean when the offer is getting signed. It has nothing to do with anything. It's just the date that you as the agent write this piece of paper. Whenever you send it to your clients, all that stuff, this is the date that you sit down to write it. First thing that's going to go in there, I hope you guys, first of all, in zip forms, there are so many cool tools that will help you put your offers together and be really successful with your offers. So I love the cover sheet. The first thing that pops up is the cover sheet. You can pop in all the information, your buyer's names, the seller's name. You know that if you click on the APN in the MLS, it gives you the seller's information, so you can have the correct seller's name. You want to make sure that all your agency information and your name and all that stuff is populated. And then you hit that MLS Connect button, right? That's one of my favorite things ever. MLS Connect will pull all the information from the MLS into your cover sheet, which then populates all of your forms. You guys know about that? Yeah. Okay, all right. So, well, then I could just go home then. You guys already have all the information. So that is going to help you. So by the time you get to your offer and you're ready to start writing it, you've got a good amount of it already pre-populated. So you've got the buyer's name, you've got the property address, you've got the city and the county, and then you've got the APN number in there. The next thing you're going to get into is the agency relationship stuff. You have to state what's going on with the agency relationship. So by the time you're here, you know if you're dealing with dual agency, meaning that's you as the person writing the offer and the person who has the listing belong to the same brokerage. If that is the case, then you're going to have dual agency. And so the first thing you're going to put in is your company's brokerage number, and then you and your license number, and then the listing agent and their license number and the listing company. And if the two brokerage license numbers are the same, That's dual agency. The agents themselves do not determine whether or not it's dual agency. It's the brokerage that determines whether or not it's dual agency, okay? So that's a big one. And those boxes have to be checked. So when you pull it over from MLS Connect, it fills everything in for you, but it doesn't check the boxes. So that's one of the biggest mistakes I see when reviewing documents is you look at it and you go, oh, it's all filled in, but the boxes didn't get checked, and those boxes have to be checked. So make sure when you're putting your offers together that you're checking the boxes. If you check the box that says both buyer and seller, it'll automatically check the second one for you. So it tries to help us out a lot. It knows how we are, and it tries to help us out a lot. So CAR's done a really good job of trying to clean these forms up and make them super easy for us. When you're first getting used to them, it's like, what's going on? It's complicated. But then if you kind of just like let it go with the flow, you'll see they're helping us. They really are. If there's more than one brokerage involved, they've moved this to the top section. You check that box, and then it's going to automatically have the additional brokerage acknowledgement pulled into the transaction as well. And that would be if you and another agent from another brokerage are working one of the sides together. So for whatever reason, I'm with Coldwell Banker, and I'm working with a Keller Williams agent. For whatever reason, we're both representing the buyer or we're both representing the seller, then we would use the additional brokerage acknowledgement. That almost never happens, so just don't even worry about that. All right. And then it's got the potentially competing offers. We went into great detail about the potentially competing offers, right? We talked about the disclosure for representing more than one buyer or seller. The box is already checked because we already went through that because they attached it to the document and put it all together so we could miss it. Yes?
Going back to what you're saying about multiple people representing the same buyer, what if you referred a client to,
No. So if you refer a client, then you're going to sign a referral agreement, and that is going to be an agreement between you and that brokerage, your brokerage and that brokerage, that if that deal closes with that client, they're going to pay you, but that wouldn't go on the purchase agreement. That's separate. This is if you both want to go in together for whatever reason and represent that client together. That's what we're saying. That almost never happens. But it does happen from time to time, just not often. All right, and then terms of the purchase and allocation of costs. The items in this paragraph are contractual terms of the agreement. Reference paragraphs provided further explanation. This form is 16 pages, and the parties are advised to read all 16 pages. So we are not parties, but you guys should all read the contract through at least one time, right? Read it through. It's important. This is there's a lot of stuff that we have to do, but this is a really important piece of what we have to do. So I'm going to give you lots of stuff to highlight and mark down, but just take it piece by piece, read a little bit at a time, but take the time to read through the whole full document. The grid makes it super easy to read through. It used to be when we were reviewing offers or we were putting offers together, or if you're a listing agent, you're getting offers, you got to go to this page, then you got to go over to that page, and everything's all through the contract. Well, now with the grid, all of the terms that matter are all in one place, and they're all organized together in the categories, right? I think when they were doing the RPA before, whenever something would change or they would add it on, they just kind of add it on to the end. And now they have the opportunity to just completely restructure everything and put everything kind of in a place that makes sense. So this is awesome. I love this new purchase agreement. You just got to get used to it. You just got to know it. There's not that many changes, but the changes that they made are all the stuff that used to get on our nerves anyway. So they fixed it. So it's super awesome. So you guys are going to be cheering and clapping. We're going to play some music later. This is a party. This is great. All right, so let's get into the grid. So first thing on the grid, you've got the whether or not it's a cash offer, you've got your purchase price, and then whether or not it's an all-cash offer. You've got your close of escrow, and then the expiration of offer. So let's dig into that. So first thing, in this play offer that we're dealing with, we just got a nice round number. We got $1 million, right? Everything's like $1.2 million, right? Have you guys noticed that all the listings are like $1.2 million? What happened? What happened? I went to a 2-bedroom listing in Lincoln, in downtown Lincoln, and it was like 520 something, and I just kept scratching my head. I'm like, what happened? So anyway, it happened, and here we are. So first thing, purchase price, $1 million. First thing we want to know, right? There's nothing else we want to know but like, well, how much are you offering? And is it cash? So if it's cash, you're going to check the box that it's all cash. And what does cash mean? It means there's no loan needed to close the deal. And we laugh because there's all of these products, right? I've got some lenders over here. They might know about some of these products that kind of masquerade themselves as cash, right? Or they position themselves as cash because cash is king, and we all want to be king or queen. But really, all cash, when you're writing an offer, means there's no loan needed. So in my mind, if you're getting a bridge loan, that's a loan. But, you know, that's just me. So cash would be where you put that there. And then how long is it going to take you to close escrow? How fast can you get this thing closed, right? And hopefully all of us are getting our clients fully underwritten so we can be really competitive in this market. And we are trying to close as soon as possible, and then we're letting the seller stay in the house for another year after close of escrow, right? Because they need it to go find another house. So we're closing in a day, and then we're letting them stay for a year, right? That's how we get our offers accepted. I'm joking, new people. I'm joking. We're not doing that, but it seems that way sometimes. But you know, everybody wants a quick close, and then they want to be able to stay in the property for as long as possible after that. And we'll touch on how we get that done. And then the expiration of offer. So technically, whenever you write an offer, it is supposed to be in good faith. And if you can't buy 2 houses, then you shouldn't be writing 2 offers. So that's why they have the expiration of offer, because you have the offer out for however much time that is. And then after that expiration period, you can go out and write another offer on another home. But you should not be writing multiple offers on multiple homes unless they can afford to buy multiple homes, okay? So that's what the expiration of offer is. However, there are plenty of times where the offer will expire, but then the seller will decide that they are going to accept the offer, and the buyer's happy, and they move forward, and everybody is good. And there's no addendum required or anything like that. As long as the seller signs it and the buyer acknowledges it, then you're all good. You don't need a further addendum after that. But the expiration of offer allows you kind of an opportunity to say, okay, I've made this offer, now I'm free to go make another offer. Deposit. Let's talk about the deposit. So when we are looking at purchasing property, I think I'm lost on my pages here. Here we go. There's a lot going on, you guys. Be patient with me. Okay, so the initial deposit amount is right there, and then they added something really cool and new. When you put in a number of what your initial deposit is, it automatically does the math for you, and it tells you what percentage of the purchase price your deposit is. So I used to be sitting there with my phone on the calculator trying to figure it out. So it tells you up there. And so you can actually play with it, and if you think you had 2% but you were wrong and it puts another number in, you can like change it up and get it to where you want it to be 2%. I like 2%. 2% makes the most sense to me. Sometimes you got to go more. Anything less than that kind of seems like you don't really have enough skin in the game. And the reason yes. Yes, that's what it does. It doesn't work the backwards way, but it does. When you put in the number and then it tells you what percent it is. Okay. It doesn't, like, you can't put in the percent and then it tells you the number. I don't think it works like that. But I haven't tried that. Anybody try that?
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work? Okay. So the deposit is the buyer's skin in the game. That is the buyer's skin in the game. So what happens when a seller accepts a seller cannot take another offer, they can't do anything, they're kind of like stuck until that buyer makes a decision to remove all contingencies and perform or cancel. So in order for the seller to take their property off the market and say, you, Mr. Buyer or Mrs. Buyer, or they buyer, are the one that I'm going to offer my property to, they want to make sure that that buyer is putting up something that is going to ensure that they're serious. And the deposit tells you how serious the buyer is about the offer. And so if you're not putting up some number that is significant, then you're not serious. 3% is the cutoff because there is a clause in the contract, liquidated damages clause, that says that the seller can't retain more than 3% or the initial deposit, whichever is less. And so that's why 3% is usually the maximum that you'll ever see for the deposit amount. And I think 2% is kind of in the middle competitive. 1% is probably on the lower competitive end. Obviously, 3% is going to be the most competitive. Does that make sense? So your initial deposit, and then the deposit, they're assuming, or it's defaulting to, that you're going to wire that deposit. The client is going to wire that deposit directly to the escrow company. And we all loved wires for a really long time, but now that there's all this wire fraud, sometimes people decide they don't want to wire unless they absolutely have to, so they'll opt to bring in a check. The only thing about when they bring in a check, if it's not a cashier's check, or sometimes even when it is a cashier's check, the check needs to clear. And so that just means, as the listing agent, you really want to be, whether it's a wire, check, or whatever, when you're the listing agent, one of your main jobs, right? Once you accept that offer and that thing gets in escrow, you're watching that deposit to see when that receipt gets into escrow. You need to be on that, like a dog on a bone, right? Because that buyer is showing you whether or not they're going to perform. And especially in this market, you guys know what's happening, right? People make all of these offers with zero contingencies. They hold on to their deposit, and then they do all of their investigation, and then they put their deposit in, right? So they're using that as their contingency period. So if you're doing the best to protect your seller, you're going to want to make sure that deposit gets into escrow as soon as possible, and you're going to want to be hitting them with the notice to perform if they don't have that deposit check in place. You guys with me on that? Makes sense, right? That is your job as a listing agent, to be making sure that that happens. Sometimes when you're the listing agent, once you get an offer accepted, you're like, psh, I'm out. Let me know when my check comes, you know what I mean? But it's a little bit more than that, right? You still got to watch all of those time periods. That's going to be the listing agent's job, is to watch those time periods like a hawk. There's also an opportunity where you could increase the deposit. I almost never see that in the market from my deals that we do in my office. But sometimes people will say, okay, upon contingency removal or upon whatever, I'm going to increase my deposit to a certain amount. And when you increase the deposit to a certain amount, you want to make sure that that deposit becomes part of the liquidated damages. So that's just one more piece that you want to think about on an increased deposit. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because we almost never see the increased deposit happen. Number 3, under retention of deposit, that used to be, I think it was section 21B, and they've moved it up in the contract. This is one of those examples where they're organizing everything to fit in the place where it belongs. And this says that when you initial the liquidated damages clause, that the buyer and seller are advised to consult a qualified California real estate attorney before adding any other clause, specifying the remedy, such as release or forfeiture of deposit, or making the deposit non-refundable for failure of buyer to complete the purchase. Any such clause shall be deemed invalid unless the clause independently satisfies the statutory liquidated damages requirements set forth in the Civil Code. Yes? Oh, where is it in the document? Yeah, page 4. I just have it right here on my forms because I know that it relates. If you look at the grid, so guys, when you look at the grid and you look at the sections in there, you see how, let me go back. You see how at the top it says D2? That's the number that we're on in the grid. The second column is the reference for where it is in the contract. I should have told you that. Sorry, my bad. So that tells you, like when you're looking at this and you're looking at anything in the grid, you go to that second column in the contract. That's going to be where everything for that piece is explained. Sorry, that was kind of important. I left that out. Yeah. So that's the pieces that I clip and put at the bottom of my slide are going to be referencing where they say in the contract that that piece goes. So what that clause is about is that a lot of times we love to get fancy, realtors love to get fancy and pretend like we're attorneys, and we like to write our own language, right? Let's write contract language, right? I always advise you to never write contract language. There is a form or document for almost everything that's ever come up. Like, none of us are that cool and unique that we're coming up with something that no one has ever thought of. Sometimes, rare times, right? But for the most part, there's probably a CAR form that you can use that the CAR attorneys have already researched, written, and they know what they're doing because they're attorneys and they know all the forms, not just the ones you're thinking of. And so don't get fancy. So sometimes people like to write in a clause that says the buyer's going to release their deposit right now. Like, forget about contingency removal, forget about all the stuff that's written in the contract. I just want you to release the deposit straight over to the seller. And they don't want us to do that, right? Because of all of the protections that are available in the contract, that's not advised. And so they threw this in there, or put this in there, to say that if you do that and you say the buyer is going to release the deposit directly over to the seller and both people sign off and agree to it, it could be later deemed something like that. It might not actually happen because they can bring in an attorney and fight that that clause does not fall within the statutory independently satisfy the liquidated damages requirement. So probably just don't do that. Right? Probably just don't write in the release of deposit. Sometimes people are going to insist, right? We work for our clients. We're their agent, we advise them, we help them. We don't give legal advice, but we advise them and we help them. But sometimes they're going to insist, I want this. This is something that I want to see done. And so that's the situation where I get out my big red pen and I say, okay, you're going to do that, that's fine, but here it is in the contract where it says that it can be deemed invalid. Do you see this? And then I send that to them and say, you can move forward, but you got my big red circle and that's going in my file, right? So we can't, we again, work for our clients. We do our best to advise them and we cover ourselves when we're advising them, and we do our best. So hopefully everybody has like a snipping tool. That's my favorite thing. Like whenever like other agents are like getting a little like this, I like to snip and cut and highlight and send. All right. When you know the contract, you can be sassy like that, right? All right, let's talk about the next section on the grid, which is loan amount. So everything that has to do with the loan amount is going to be in there. You're on page 1 of the grid page. So yeah, so what I tried to do on these is just like, we're still on this main grid, we're still on the first page, I'm just highlighting the section that I'm talking about, and then I'll go over to the next page which has like the actual language there. So, sorry, did my best in terms of like, how do I present this to you guys with so much stuff going on and give you the detail. All right, so loan amount. So again, you've got the one section, this is section E1. The section that references it is 5C1. You've got whether or not, you've got the first section is your first loan and the second section is your second loan. We very rarely have a secondary loan going on these days. The good thing about this market that makes it stable is there's a lot of cash in the market, right? There's big down payment amounts and then there's cash in the market. And when we get into a market where we see a lot of heavy financing and not a lot of money to support it, that's when we start looking at a market that's kind of unstable. So all of you guys are putting into the market right now.
I just thought of something, because I know in the Bay Area they've done a few cryptocurrency transactions. Would that be considered cash?
I don't know. I don't know. Anybody know? Cryptocurrency? That just,
In the Bay Area they've done a few transactions like that lately.
that's so far above my pay grade. I have no idea, honestly. No. You think it is? It might be. So do they transfer it? Would the crypto be exchanged by the parties, or would it be transferred into cash?
It's like a wire, I'm told, but they've done a few transactions, like,
Yeah.
anyway, this dawned on me.
I think any method that the two parties are willing to accept is fine, as long as both the buyer and seller are willing to accept it, then they're fine. I'm just still on page 1 of the RPA in the grid. I'm still in the first page of the RPA where the grid is. And then I'm skipping back to the sections in the back, and so you can see, like on my slide up here, I'm on 5C where it talks about loan amount. So if you skip to section 5C, if you want to like do any highlighting, it's going to be a lot of back and forth with it, but I didn't have a better way to get this to you guys. All right, so after you say what your loan amount is, it'll do the math for you once again, and it'll put in the percentage, right? So you know right off the bat if it's 20%, if it's 10%, if it's 5%, whatever it is. That's a new cool feature that we have with this new purchase agreement. And then on the side, on the last column, you indicate whether it's conventional. You don't need to check anything if it's conventional. If it's FHA, VA, seller financing, or other, you would check the box for that. You've got the section where you put in your rate and whether it's fixed and if there's any points. And a lot of people leave that out. I think that's really important, that section under where it says what your loan amount is. I'm talking the middle column. This thing has a pointer, right? No. Right here. So if you have nothing there, but you actually have a loan, you can't really use your loan contingency, because your loan contingency says the buyer is unable to get a loan. But what loan, right? If there's no rate cap, surely they could get a loan at some crazy rate and some amount of points, right? So it's really important that you put, now you guys got me pressing all kind of buttons. It's really important that you put something in there, like if rates right now are 4.5, then you might want to put 4.5 or 4.75. You want to put a cap, like if my buyer can not get a loan at this rate, then we get to use our contingency and back out and keep our deposit, right? So whenever you think about contingencies, I want you to think about keep our deposit, right? The whole point of a contingency is you get to walk away with your deposit, right? That's what the contingency means. If I walk away, I get to keep my deposit if I still am within my contingency period. So that's really important that that section gets completely filled out. And then you just do exactly the same thing if there is a second loan. Let's talk about buyer loan status. So I'm on section 5C3. And it says, this is new to our purchase contract. This isn't new in the new purchase contract. It says, buyer authorizes seller and seller's authorized agent to contact the buyer's lender. So we've always done it, but it's never been in the contract that there's pre-authorization for the seller to contact the buyer's lender. They can ask the lender about the status of the buyer's loan and whether or not a contingency of the agreement. If the contract information from the buyer's lender is different from that provided under the terms in paragraph 6, the buyer shall deliver an updated contract information within 1 day. So if you call the lender and the lender says, oh yeah, fully approved, VA, it's going on, and you're like, wait, the contract said it was conventional, then you're like, oops, you're in trouble, you're caught. And so they're giving you 1 day to provide an update, right? And then, of course, the seller does not have to cooperate with any of the conditions of the VA loan because that's not what they agreed to. So that's really important. Another piece that's changed, yes?
Do you have to rewrite the whole contract then, or you just do an addendum?
An addendum.
Okay.
So you never want to rewrite the whole contract in any circumstance, because once it's like signed and agreed to, you would have to like cancel that if you were going to rewrite something new. So it's always an addendum if you're making changes or additions to the contract. Good question. Thank you for asking that.
In that scenario, if they wrote an addendum, then the seller has an option to not
Accept or not accept, yep. Yep. And we're going to talk about that too, buyer stated financing. There's a place in the contract that speaks to that. So FHA VA, there used to be a form that you could fill out to tell the seller if there were FHA VA requirements that the seller needed to cooperate with. That's no longer done that way. And now they are putting that piece on the request for repairs. So if there's something that that loan requires from the seller, that now is going right into the request for repairs. And that's new and different with this new RPA. It wasn't done that way before. But the seller has no obligation to pay or do anything that's required for that buyer to obtain that FHA or VA loan unless they agree to it on the request for repairs. But just because the buyer's getting a VA loan or an FHA loan does not mean that the seller has to do any of those things unless they agree to those things on the request for repairs. All right. Talisa, yes. No, I didn't say that. No, so sometimes on a FHA or VA loan, they will have requirements, and the guidelines change on and off, right, on FHA and VA loans. But sometimes they will say, like, for instance, I know the requirement now is that the lenders now the lenders can pay it, but sometimes when the requirements change, there are certain things that the seller has to agree to when they're doing the loan. And there's nothing in there right now, I think, that matters, but that could change, right? Guidelines and things change all the time. So that's why that's in there, to say that if the seller is required to do something for that loan, then it's up to the seller to do it. So for instance, I had another example where the seller was a builder, and because he was a new construction builder, the buyer was getting a VA loan, and VA required the seller to qualify as a builder, and the seller couldn't qualify as a builder and didn't want to qualify from what the VA was requiring him to do. And so the contract was canceled because the seller is not obligated to do any of those things that the VA needed him to do in order for the buyer to get that loan. Does that make sense?
It makes more sense now, actually, the way it's done now, because before, now they know, the lenders know they can do VA loans where the buyers can pay some of it. They change things around, and they allow the buyer to pay for it, which takes it off the seller.
Right, and it makes it,
This way is better because the seller's actually given a choice.
right, right.
It should be.
And then I think that a lot of VA and FHA, you're going to be required to do a lot of things, and those things don't still exist today, but we still kind of have those same feelings about them, and so those loans kind of go to the bottom of the pile. Yes?
So is this where we would fall into like the appraisal? Because I know with VA and FHA, if it doesn't appraise at the value that you're offering, they have to come down or there's no deal. So is this where we would write something like that in about?
That's not actually true. It's not that if it doesn't appraise, they have to come down.
No, they don't have to, but they can't get the VA loan unless they can make up the gap.
They can make up the gap.
They can make up the gap, but if they can't make up the gap, is that where you would?
No, let me find that section on here. It's coming up real close. Hold on. There is a section on the grid. Hold on, let me look on here. That says FHA amendatory clause, right? So the FHA amendatory clause says that if it's an FHA or VA deal, and you have to have the FHA amendatory clause signed on every FHA and VA deal. And what it says is that the buyer has the right to cancel and retain their deposit if the property does not appraise. Why that's important is because even if a VA or FHA buyer removes the appraisal contingency, they can still cancel and get their deposit back. blanket, period, done, no questions, right? So you can't even write an addendum or add language or change that in any way. They will always retain that right, that if they decide to cancel because of the appraisal, they get their deposit back. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about that FHA amendatory clause. So it's most important that a seller understands that, because if you get an offer, I believe most FHA and VA buyers that write an offer, no loan contingency, fully intend to make up the gap, but the seller can't count on that. The seller has to understand that if they choose not to, they get to walk away with their deposit. Yes.
On the mandatory clause, if you have an FHA or VA buyer that, let's say the house is $450 and they know they have an extra $10,000, could you put $460 in that clause? Like basically saying, if it appraises higher, we're willing to pay the gap at $460? Or would you always put the purchase price?
So when we get to that section, which is coming up next on the appraisal, we're going to talk about appraisal gap.
Okay,
But on the amendatory clause, you can't change it. They get, if the property does not appraise, they get to walk away and keep their deposit. It doesn't mean that they can't pay more, but if they choose to walk away because the property didn't appraise, they always retain that right. Yes?
So if you check the box for FHA or VA, does the amendatory clause auto-populate to the RPA?
The form becomes part of the, yes, part of the package, yes. And you can't close without it. No lender is going to let you close without having that document signed by both parties. So that has to happen. So if you're representing a seller, I just want to make sure that you're having a conversation with your sellers and making sure that they understand that. Again, there's no way of knowing whether it's their intention to close the gap or not, but the seller has to know that if they don't want to, they can walk away. Natalie.
Okay, so let's just assume you write an offer for $460, and it's an FHA, and you take the mandatory, and you know that they'll pay that $10,000 extra. So can you put $450 there? And then I think there's something in the mandatory clause that says that by the close of escrow, you have to have it match the price. Can you do it lower because they'll pay the difference, and then at the end have everybody sign one that says $460?
I think that's super complicated, and the thing I've looked at that amendatory clause back and forth, and it's been brought to my attention in a lot of different ways, like, oh, try this, oh, try that. And what it always comes back to when I read it and I talk to the attorneys, if they want to cancel because it didn't appraise, they can cancel because it didn't appraise. So whatever number you write on there, write your heart away. They can cancel if it doesn't appraise.
If the buyer went in and said, here's our offer, and maybe the seller was afraid that it might not appraise at what the offer was, and the seller went in and countered them with a modification to the appraisal, which would be, in the event that the appraised value comes in lower than the purchase price, the buyer is willing to cover the gap. If that verbiage is in the counter offer, and if it's FHA, which one supersedes the other?
FHA. It supersedes every and anything. It's the rule of the law. It doesn't matter what you write. So that's why I keep saying I fully believe it's probably their intention to cover the gap, but your seller has to know they can always walk out.
Is that the FHA form right there? Is that it?
No, that's not it.
I was just trying to see where it said on the form. Right.
Yeah.
We don't have the form.
FHA VA attached, car form, FHA VA attached. Where does it say? If FHA VA is attached, deliver a list of required lender repairs. I don't have the form in your packet. It's in there. The form is in the. It's in the forms, and it's called the FVAC form. I didn't include it in your packet. You can look at the form and you can read it when you go home, but I promise you, it says what I'm telling you. It says that they can, and all it says is they can cancel and get their deposit back. It's not nothing super complicated, right? They can still buy the property. They can still close the gap. But if they choose not to, they can get out with their deposit.
Would that be on the VA form as well?
It's one form. It's called the FVAC.
It's one, that's one form for.
Uh-huh. It's called the FVAC. So it's like FHA, NVA, a mandatory clause. All right. This is important stuff. So some of you are thinking like, shut up, don't ask questions. These are important questions. This is really good stuff. So the questions make it better, trust me. I am one of those people that usually sits in the back of the room like, if you raise your hand one more time, but this is good. I like them when I'm up here. I like it one more time. Okay. All right, so we talked about that. The last piece on the section, the last piece on the first page of the grid has your occupancy. A lot of people miss the occupancy. So it says it defaults to primary, meaning they're going to occupy the property. And if not, they would check secondary or investment. And then that's just the place where the math gets done for us. The down payment and the purchase price total go on that last section of the grid. All right. Yeah.
The balance of the down payment, basically, what our proof of funds should have 980,000 on it, correct?
The balance of the down payment is just going to be the number of your down payment minus whatever you put for your closing cost. I mean, for your deposit.
Okay, so the deposit,
But that's not going to be, so it's not what the client has to bring in. That's super confusing. Where it says balance of down payment, balance of down payment is whatever they took your loan amount, they figured out what your down payment was, they subtracted the deposit amount that you put in there, and they put that number on there. That number means nothing. Forget that number. It doesn't help. Yes?
Just revisiting the occupancy, if you have a buyer that is buying a property and they're not going to live in it, but they're buying it for a family member, so the lender is considering it owner occupied, do you say that it's an investor or owner occupied? If you're buying a home for an elderly parent or a sick child or something like that, you can't qualify, you can call it owner occupied. You can qualify under owner occupied terms on the loan, even though the person that's the borrower is not actually going to occupy.
I'm going to leave that up to you guys to whether you check owner occupied or not owner. I don't want to chime in on that one.
That is correct.
Okay.
It doesn't say owner occupied, it says primary.
It says it's going to be primary, investment, or secondary. I don't know what the rural police would say on that one. I think it's for, so that is on there for two reasons. If you want to, so I think if you want to think about it this way, there's two reasons why that's on there. One for the lender, right? The lender's going to determine the loan status based on what you put on there, whether it's occupied or not. And some sellers care. Some sellers do not want their home to become a rental or something other. They want like a person to live and love on their home. So in your situation where the lender says it's okay and a person is going to live and love on the home, maybe it's okay. But Talisa didn't say it. You heard it from me. Okay? All right. Yes.
If you put the other person on the title, even if it's 2% or 5%, that's how you can get it okay that it's an owner occupant.
Okay. I trust you.
Multiple times in owner occupant where they're buying for their kid and they put the kid on 2% or 5% title, they're still part owner, so it's owner occupied.
And this is a village. Yes. I agree. Thank you. All right, let's go to page 2 of the grid. All right, so grid is 3 pages. We're already in page 2 of the grid. The top, I do want to point that out. So the top, you've got your paragraph number, you've got your where it shows up in the contract, and then you've got like 3 other columns of terms that we're going to be talking about. So when you're looking at the grid, you're looking at all that stuff on each and every section. So first section of the grid is still talking about finance terms. So let's dig into the first section of the grid. So if there's any credit to the buyer from the seller, then you're going to put that on there. And then you're going to say whether that credit is applied towards their closing cost, right? So that makes it easier for us. We used to always have to write seller to credit buyer, such and such percentage of da-da-da-da towards buyer's closing costs. Now all we have to do is put a number and check a box, right? So they made it easy for us there. And then you can put whatever additional finance terms that you want to come up outside of the seller credit. Usually the additional finance terms were whether or not there was going to be a seller credit. But, you know, like I said, realtors like to get fancy. I'm sure you'll come up with something to put in the box. So that's that section. Then we get into your verifications, right? So whether or not you have your pre-approval, if it's all cash, whether or not you have your funds that you're listing agent or the seller, and I'm taking my property off the market, and you're going to show me your money within 3 days? Nah, right? I'm not taking my property off the market until I see the money. So I don't understand why anybody would put that they're going to show the proof in 3 days. That sounds like the beginning of a really long joke, right? So I think that it should be your best practice that you're always going to have your proof of funds, right? That's going to be a bank statement or some account statement showing that the funds are available today in that person's name in order for them to be able to purchase the property. So those funds need to be in the person's name who's on the contract. I can't tell you how many times I've seen where, you know, someone else is going to provide the funds, right? And then this is another tip to you guys as realtors. If someone else is providing any part of the money or any part of the funding, they need to be in the car. And what I mean by that is you've drove this buyer around for 4 weeks, showing them all kinds of stuff. They started out up here with what they wanted, right? And now they've whittled down to this shack that they can afford, right? And they're ready to write their best offer on this shack, and they love it. And then here comes grandma, and grandma's putting up the money. And grandma's like, we're not paying for this shack. Grandma wasn't in the car to see all of the rejection, right, and everything that happened. All the players need to be a part of it because they're going to pull the rug out from under you. It happens every single time, right? If they're giving the gift money, go ahead and give the gift money now. We can sit in my account. Give it now, right? Because they're not going to like the choice your buyer made. It's not what they had in mind when they thought, oh, I'm going to help you buy a house. Not a shack, right? But honestly, they can only afford a shack in this market, right? You guys are out there in the same market that I'm out there. You don't look at me like I'm crazy. You know what I'm talking about. Nikki? I'm good with that. I'm good with it. I'd be good with it. I prefer the lender to provide that in their pre-approval letter because the lender is saying they saw the account. That's what they're telling us. And if they're liars, then, you know, then that's a whole nother conversation. But we should be able to rely on them being honest, right? Because then if they're liars, then maybe they don't qualify for the loan either. But I prefer to see the lender say they verified the assets. And that way you don't have to like black out the person's account, security threat, and all that kind of stuff. Like that's the preferred method. But there needs to be a method, right? Somebody has had to lay eyes on it and say that that buyer has that money in their name, right? That's really important, you guys. You're gonna thank me later for this one. That's a big one. You can enjoy all this sorrow and pain that I've been through. Okay, so same thing for closing cost. So first of all, closing cost and down payment are not contingencies. So know that. The fact of whether or not the buyer can come up with the money for the closing costs and the down payment is not a contingency. They said they have it, they better have it, right? And so if they don't have it, that is not a reason that they get to cancel and keep their deposit. They're just out. AO, right? So you can avoid that. Again, I go back to, I'm not taking my seller's home off the market unless I've already verified that they have the money for the closing cost and the down payment, and if it's all cash, they have the money to cover the cash, right? So the new contract, it defaults to attached with the offer. On the old one, it was like within 3 days, and then you had to check the box that you were special because you were attaching it with the offer. So we're not doing that anymore. All right, then the next, within that section is the final verification of condition. Again, not a contingency, but towards the end of the transaction, you're gonna want the buyer to go to the property and give a look-see and make sure that the place is maintained in the condition that it was on the day of acceptance. Everything should look the same. Pool should still be blue, shouldn't be green, grass should be cut. All the appliances, all of the water and gas and all that stuff should be turned on and working. There should be hopefully some boxes if they're moving out, right? That's what I'm always looking for, right? Where are the boxes? What's going on? But nowadays nobody's ever moving out. They're staying a year after close of escrow, right? But so that's a whole nother subject. If the buyer isn't going and they're sending you, they're still waiving it, right? The buyer themselves needs to be the one walking through and taking a look for you to use that final verification form and say that yep, A-okay, you should be doing that. If you can do it, you can go look and tell them what I saw. You can FaceTime, you can do all the stuff that we do that's cool, but they still waived it if they didn't go themselves, okay? And assignment request. So there is, sometimes the buyer will want to assign their ability to purchase to someone else, and they have 17 days to do that if they choose. And the contract says they can do that as long as it's reasonable. They have to disclose if they're receiving any money for the ability to do that. And it also says that the seller cannot withhold that ability for any unreasonable reason. I'm paraphrasing. Where am I? Limits on credits to the buyer. This is not what I was talking about. All right, and then also, I didn't point out that section over there where I have circled pre-qualification, pre-approval, and then fully underwritten. So I kind of mentioned this a little bit before. If I'm the listing agent, I only want to see fully underwritten, right? So we all want cash. We can't always get cash. But at this point, in this stage, in this competitive market, you want to make sure that the buyer is fully underwritten, right? That means that the lender has taken all of the buyer's stuff, their real stuff that they've submitted, they've sent it into their system. The system has come back and said, everything looks good, we can do this loan, these are the things we need to make sure that we can do this loan. So it's gone through the underwriter, and the underwriter has looked at it, right? So first stage is pre-qual. Pre-qual means they got on the phone with your client said, yeah, I've been on my job for 2 years, and I make such and such, and I have good credit. And they go, oh great, you qualify, right? That's pre-qual, that's trash. That's nothing, right? A pre-qual is trash. Pre-approval means they got your stuff, they got your pay stubs, they looked at your credit. Am I telling the truth? Okay. They looked at your credit, they verified your assets, and they did a once-over, and the step that we want is they put it all into the system, the underwriter looked at it, didn't come up with any major red flags, and we know all we need really is the appraisal and prelim, and we're ready to roll, okay?
Does a pre-qual even exist anymore? I'm like, why is that there?
Not with an offer.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not very smart, you could get away with it, right? I mean, I don't know. There's suckers born every day. So that's why we do classes like this, so we can educate everybody so they know, right? Because a seller is not going to know the difference between a pre-qual, pre-approval, and a fully underwritten, right? Only an agent would be able to explain that to them, right?
Well, my question is, with this, I know, like, when I've done deals, it's like going from pre-approval to fully underwritten. It's like, is there a separate, like, is there a formal, fully underwritten approval letter?
Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah.
I've never seen it, because we've just always just transitioned into.
You want your lender's letter to say that you've been fully underwritten.
So it actually says fully underwritten, when it gets to that point, when it gets to that third, okay.
Yeah. 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 And you've got plenty of time because you've been driving them around for 4 weeks.
So from a lender's perspective though, when you have a TBD property, there's no property address, really can fully underwrite it.
Some lenders can.
Well, you can run automated findings through Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, where you get all the data, you put it in and you run it through, you get your automated underwriting, who's eligible or whatnot. And to me, that's.
Yeah, so it's going to be conditioned on appraisal and prelim.
Right.
So those things can't come until you actually identify the property, right?
Well, yeah, because automated system too, if you have a property adjuster, you could maybe get an appraisal waiver in the
Right.
So
Yeah.
findings to me are like an approval.
Right, yeah. I'm not a lender. I'm not going to be able to tease apart the difference. But if I get a letter from my lender that says they put me through underwriting, I'm good with that, right? I'm trusting. And that's the other thing, right? Sometimes people will want it from a local lender, someone that they know, right? If you get something from some online internet-based company that you don't feel comfortable with, that might not be the best thing. So I have a situation where the client works for a company that doesn't have the best reputation and they want to go with that company. They're going to use that company, but they also got approved through a local lender, so they actually have some credibility. You got to do what you got to do in this market, right? It's crazy. So I would make sure all my I's are dotted and my T's are crossed because it's super competitive. Is there another question? Yes.
It's not about that, so we're not done with that.
Go ahead.
So I wanted to jump back to final verification.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a listing, what is that, so where does the 5 days, what is your due diligence as a listing agent? Like at 4 days, can I send my verification waiver? When?
The listing agent doesn't do the verification. The
No.
buyer.
But if the buyer's not doing it, then they have to waive it. They have to submit their waiver of verification.
Final verification is optional. It's not contractually, you're not contractually obligated to do the final verification.
Okay, so is the waive, I'm assuming the waiver is more to cover the seller.
Right, you could send it over and say, hey, it doesn't look like you're gonna do your verification. Do you wanna just sign a waiver?
Right.
You could.
So could you do that at 4 days?
I suppose, yeah,
Because they have do they have up until 5 days? Or is it 5 days to close?
it's in the grid and there's a box to check. Let's see, verification,
5 days.
and then you can check a box, right? So let's find it on here. So 5 days prior to close, so they have within that window of the 5 days prior to close and the closing date. So I suppose you could send it on the 4th day and say, hey, if you're not going to do it, sign the waiver.
Okay.
And again, they don't have to sign the waiver either. They could just ignore you because it's not a contractual obligation. All right. What else do I have on here? Limits on credits to buyer. So there's a such thing as contractual credit, and then there's lender limits, right? So sometimes we'll have a situation where you're getting a credit for closing costs. Not in this market. This is 10 years ago or 10 years in the future, but you still might need to know about this. So maybe you're getting a credit for closing cost, and you're getting a 3% credit for closing cost. And then you do your inspections, and now you find there's issues, and you're like, give me a credit for closing costs, and you're getting another $10,000 for closing costs. And your credits all add up, and now you're at 5% in credits that the buyer's getting. The lender has a requirement for every loan and every borrower as to how much credit that borrower is allowed to get. See the lender limit. And so whatever that lender says is the max you can get, that's the max you can get. And then they try to close the gap, right? And they're basically saying, don't try to get a check after escrow, don't try to reduce the price, don't try to change things up, you know what I mean? You're basically, that lender limit on credit is it, no more, right? So, and so sometimes people will say, well, I can't get any more credit, reduce the price. the seller does not have to agree to a price reduction because you're capped out in your lender limit. Does that make sense, or is that confusing?
How do we know what the lender limit is on each deal,
If you ask, so when they find out, normally when they find out if you're getting a lot of credits, they'll say, whoa, right? And you can find out. And what is it typically? It's about 3%?
3% is typical, you get up to 6% with like 10%.
And they'll find ways, right? They'll get creative, and they'll buy down the rate, and they'll do all kinds of stuff to help you use up that money if you have a lot of extra money. Most lenders are really good about trying to find ways to do that. Another thing you might do is like maybe the seller was paying some of the fees and you change around who's paying the fees. There's ways to go about it, but what you need to know contractually is whatever the lender loan limit is, that's the max credit that you're allowed to receive, and you have to work within that limit.
How is that different than paying above closing costs?
Paying above closing cost.
Because I know, like, you can't do a credit for above closing costs. So how is lender limit different than closing costs?
That's probably what they're talking about.
Oh, it's a lesser of the two.
They want to make sure that the buyer has skin in the game, right? And that they're not getting more money back to buy the property. Like I said, that's not happening today, right? Everybody's given everything they have. But in another situation, right, and we're going to be in this business for quite a long time, we want to make sure that the buyer is fully participating in purchasing the property and has full skin in the game and is not making money on the purchase, right? Those are part of all that Dodd-Frank stuff that happened to make sure that we don't collapse our market again.
Talisa?
Yes.
It's always good to say, buyer or seller to credit such and such amount towards closing costs or whatever, as approved by the lender. I always add that, as approved by the lender, because the lender has to approve it. And I did have one last year that I sold where one of my buyers got a lot of credit because she was actually a licensed agent and we were trying to do a deal together. And she ended up getting a 2-year home warranty.
There's things that you can do to like spend up the money, right? But you have to spend up the money. You have to use it. You can't get like a check back on the outside of the thing, and you can't expect that the seller's going to automatically reduce the price. They may be willing to, but you can't expect that that's going to happen.
Where would you put that language on the new contract? Would you put it where the seller credit, other?
Additional financing terms?
It comes up more when you're in the request for repairs and then you do the credit instead. Yeah, then you're gonna say as approved by lender, because if you already given them 2% or a certain amount, then you're covering it to limit the amount by saying as approved.
Val?
I think people missed what you said, and I just want to touch base on it, and it was buying down the interest rate of that loan. And there's lenders in the room, and would that be considered a credit, or could you actually use those funds to buy down the interest on a loan?
That's correct, yes.
And you could.
Yeah.
And that's not considered additional closing costs?
Liz, you do loans too, right?
Yeah, the reverse is different.
Okay.
We're not even allowed to.
Okay. Yeah. Great reason to meet with your lender. All right, let's talk about buyer stated financing. So we kind of talked about this a little bit before. We only have 12 minutes left, so I want to kind of like pick it up and get going. Buyer stated financing. So this is section 5C of the purchase agreement, and I have the language written up here. It says that the seller's relying on the buyer's representation of the type of financing specified. So if you put down that you're getting a conventional loan, the seller's choosing your offer because they believe you're getting a conventional loan. And that means, whether or not it's cash, how much money you're putting down, whether your offer is contingent or non-contingent. The sellers agree to a specific closing date, purchase price, and to sell in the buyer's reliance on their financing, right? So basically what I said, they chose your offer based on what you said you were going to do. The buyer shall pursue the financing specified in the agreement, even if buyer also elects to pursue alternate financing. So they might say, oh wow, I don't have to put down 20%. I can still do this, by only putting down 5. But they still need to be able to do it with 20, right? But let's say they find out, I can do this with 5. The seller has no obligation to cooperate with the buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than specified in this agreement, but shall not interfere with the closing at purchase price on close of escrow. So if they can get it for 5 and they do it for 5 and it has no effect on the seller has to still close. The seller can't say, oh, no, 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 you said you were putting down 20, I want to see 20. But let's say, and like we already had this conversation, this doesn't really happen anymore, but let's say there's some loan condition that impacts the seller can say, no, I'm not going forward. And then that way, they can block the buyer being able to get that alternate financing, and the buyer would have to move forward with the financing that they specified in the contract. Not complicated, seems complicated, right? Buyer needs to do what they said they were gonna do. If they change up and they do something else, it's okay, as long as it doesn't impact the seller. They still gotta close on the same date, they still gotta hit their contingencies, they gotta do everything they said they were gonna do. Make sense? All right. Yes?
Just really quickly, I had a situation a couple of months ago where the buyer came in at conventional, then realized they had some huge VA benefits they could use and switched to VA. Seller came back and said, I don't want to do VA, and then the fair housing discrimination was raised. Because they were saying they were being discriminated against because they were a veteran. So I'm just bringing that up because it was, he was saying, my money's my money. You know, I'm just taking care, I'm just using this benefit. There was no like seller paid repairs.
But there's the amendatory clause.
And he's changing the contract. It doesn't matter whether it's, he's changing to VA or anything else, he's changing the contract.
Well. So buyer stated financing says it's okay to change, but on VA, there's the amendatory clause. And so the seller would have to then agree to the amendatory clause. If the seller refuses to sign the amendatory clause, then there's no VA that's happening. So that's how they would put a stop to it.
That's not discrimination, he's changing the contract.
They can change the financing,
But he
but
can't change the contract. You can't change, by changing the financing, you're changing the contract.
But that's what buyer stated financing says, is that they can pursue additional financing as long as it doesn't have an impact on the seller. They can't require the seller to sign any additional forms or documents, right? If the seller agrees to a VA loan, then they're also agreeing to sign the amendatory clause. But if they didn't agree to sign the amendatory clause and the buyer pursues VA, the seller does not have to sign the amendatory clause, right? So that would have been, they're out in that situation. I'm not signing the amendatory clause. And so that would put a stop to it right there. But if there was no appraisal issue, then you kind of could argue, like, what are you doing? Why won't you sign it? I don't know. So, but that's the meaning. Good example, because that just goes to show right there. You're saying you're changing the contract, but the contract gives that permission that they can pursue another type of financing. It says it in there. That's the buyer stated financing clause, okay? As long as it doesn't impact the seller and force the seller to have to do something additional, which would be signing the amendatory clause. All right, couple more things, because I know you guys have things to do today. So this is the slide I thought I was on, which is the final verification of condition. And they're checking to make sure that the property is in the same condition. They're also checking to make sure that repairs are made. So if you agree to any repairs, it'll say in the repair section that those repairs, unless otherwise agreed, have to be done prior to the final verification. So they're checking, okay, did you really, do all the things that you said you would do when you signed the request for repairs? And then the second section is on the assignment. And it talks about the fact that they have to disclose any monetary consideration, and it also says that the seller can't withhold that in an unreasonable manner. All right, let's see if we can squeeze something else in there. All right, the next section is contingencies, and that's going to take kind of a while. I don't think I could do it in 6 minutes. You guys want me to go do some of it, or do you want to go questions at this point? All right, let's go questions, and then next week will be contingencies, which is the most fun of everything. Like, yay, come back next week for contingencies. All right, questions. We mostly ask them during the session, right? Yeah, so let's say that I am purchasing the property and I write my name on the contract, and then later I decide it makes more sense for me to buy it under my corporation. So then I'm going to assign it to my corporation, and my corporation is going to purchase it. Or, oh, I want to buy it under my trust, so I assign it to my trust. Another way is which is kind of more frowned upon, is you could get into a situation where I'm buying it today, and then I sell it to someone else while I'm still trying to purchase it, and I'm making money, right? So I get in and I write an offer, and I can purchase it for $500,000, and then 3 weeks go by, the market's shot through the roof, I sell the option to somebody else, they buy it for $550,000, right? And then I'm gonna make $50,000 on that purchase. That's the ugly way. But the way that we most commonly see is I'm putting it in my corporation, I'm putting it in my trust, I'm assigning it in that way. Yes?
The way that you just described, is that the way that wholesalers do it, kind of?
I think wholesalers buy it and then package it and then sell the whole package. I don't know enough about wholesaling though. Does anybody know that?
It's similar to that, where they sell the contract to buy it to somebody else.
Yeah, I'm,
Okay, sounds like it.
I would say I'm a small town girl, but I'm from LA, so I can't really say that.
Let's say, the example you just gave, like if they just buy it as a, your personal residence or whatever, and then like you're in the middle of escrow and you want to put it in your trust.
Yeah,
Would that be actual,
assignment,
or
yes.
you can't just, what's that one form, or
The RCSD.
if they did the that one right up in the beginning, would it make a difference then, or does it matter which way you do that?
It's different. So if you are, the RCSD allows you to change to an entity buyer, right? And the RCSD says that this entity is purchasing it, and these are the people who are signing it. You would still need an assignment agreement saying that you're assigning it to that entity if you didn't put it on the original contract. So you would need both.
You would need both, even if you did it at the first initial.
No, if you do it at the first initial offer so first of all, the RCSD is built into the offer now. You don't need an additional representative capacity. Sorry, I hate when people do that. So we're jumping ahead, but representative capacity says that you're gonna buy the property as an entity buyer, or you're gonna sell the property as an entity seller, meaning I'm selling it in my trust or buying it through my trust. And so on page, I believe it's 16 of the contract, maybe 15, it allows you to put that information in. We used to have to always use that addendum to indicate that we were doing it that way. Now you can do it right in the offer, so you don't need that representative capacity addendum. And if you do it that way, then you don't need the assignment or the representative capacity in order to do it that way. But if you, in the middle of things, say, you know what, I think I'd be better off putting this in my trust, that's when you need the assignment agreement. A little confusing. Just call me. Anything else?
You know you have a buyer and you're buying something, if you know it's in a trust, should you give them the trust advisory up front? That's what I was doing.
Yes. Let's talk about that really quickly. Front documents, things that you should be giving to your clients throughout the process, right? So this whole 4 weeks that you're driving them around and getting these offers rejected, make sure that each and every time you're giving them some piece or part, right? Because the last thing you want to do is dump all of these documents on their lap when you need to get offers accepted, right? So they should have already seen the purchase agreement, and they should have already reviewed it and had questions and answers with you. Also, market conditions advisory. That's a really good one. You want to make sure that you're giving them that up front so they understand. Market conditions advisory talks about writing offers contingent, and it talks about multiple offer situations. It talks about how sellers might make decisions on how offers go. So that's one that you definitely want to be giving them before they get ready to write their offer, so you guys can start talking about strategy and how they're going to be competitive. Obviously, you want to give them the agency disclosure to when you first meet and you first have a conversation with them. I love that form. It's called the Disclosure Information Advisory. That's another good upfront form to give. It's called the DIA, and it talks about how they should read and understand the disclosures that are going to be coming their way. Lets the seller know like how to fill out the transfer disclosure statement and the seller property questionnaire, the TDS and the SPQ. It talks about whether or not they're aware of certain things, and when a seller makes a disclosure, how much they can rely on that, right? Because the questions on all of the disclosures are you aware, right? Not does it exist or not exist, is are you aware? So if the seller isn't aware or forgot or isn't thinking of it, then they can easily put no. Yes?
So the SPQ and A, you don't have to do if it's a rental property that the seller is never occupied, right?
It's not true.
No, you still have to do it.
The only time you don't have to do the SPQ and the TDS is if you, like a successor trustee, right? So you inherited the property and you've never lived in it. You never lived in the property and you didn't yourself own the property before. But even if you're the owner of the property, you can still do a TDS and an SPQ. You just put what you're aware of. Anything else? You guys can ask me anything at all.
Do you have a brokerage here in Roseville too now? Or-
I work for Coldwell Banker. Yeah, I'm the branch manager for Coldwell Banker in Roseville. In Roseville. And yeah, I have Auburn too. I do both, yes.
Where is the office in Roseville?
It is on Douglas and Eureka. I'm a Virgo. I like long walks in the park. No, I'm kidding. All right, you guys, I hope to see you Friday. We are going to have the exciting topic of contingency removal. Contingencies, so let's get back together next week. If you want to get the recording, you would just email Robin at education@pcar. And I just want to thank the Education Committee. They do a fabulous job of putting these classes together. Every Friday almost we have something, and we always provide lunch. So thank you guys for being here, and thank you for being dedicated to your profession. See you next week.